My name is Rabbi Melanie Levav. I have the honor of serving as the executive director of Shomer Collective. Shomer Collective is a startup nonprofit. We were founded by a group of friends about 5 years ago who had had the experience of a loved one dying, and they didn't know where to turn or what to do Jewishly, and knew that there was a lot of Jewish wisdom and ritual available, but didn't feel like they had access to it, and wanted things to be different for others and for themselves in the future. And our work has evolved over the last handful of years to include programs like today, education open to the general public, and increasingly training and education for professionals working in a variety of fields, often professionals who find themselves at the intersection of Jewish communal service and end of life in a variety of roles. You can read more about our work and upcoming programs on our website. And I just want to offer thanks to our partners at ENELDA, the International End-of-Life Doula Association, for being a promotional partner and helping to get the word out about today's program. We'll talk in a little bit about the variety of training programs out there, and ENELDA offers fabulous training for people interested in becoming end-of-life doulas. They also have probably the most comprehensive directory available of end-of-life doulas. And before I introduce Zoe for us to be in conversation, I want to just take a few minutes to ground us in Jewish time, where we are in the Jewish calendar. I find myself, when things feel like they're spinning, as they do every day in the news cycle, and between personal and professional concerns, I find myself returning to the cycle of Jewish time as a way to stay grounded in the world. So in looking at where we are in the cycle of Jewish time, I want to say just a few words about that to help us all be grounded in Jewish time here together. In thinking about my training as an end-of-life doula, and I am certified as an end-of-life doula, I learned in that training that the primary role of the doula is to provide accompaniment, really just to show up, this idea of accompanying someone where they are on their journey, to be there with them in the liminal space between life and death. And I recognize that as a profound opportunity. It's really what drew me to pivot my career at the age of 40, a decade ago, toward end of life, to be able to participate in this sacred work, to offer the gift of presence, supported by the wisdom of Jewish tradition at a time that many experience as life's most difficult moments. And this week, in reading our annual cycle, grounding ourselves in the stories of ancient wisdom, the Torah portion that we read each week, we read the opening of the book of Numbers, Bamidbar in Hebrew, in the wilderness, which opens with a commandment to take a census, to count who's here among us, just like we counted a few minutes ago, who's here among us, right? Who are you showing up today? And this idea of counting as a sacred task is reinforced not only in the counting that we see in the Torah portion, but also the counting period we're in right now on the Jewish calendar, counting the 7 weeks between Passover, the last pilgrimage holiday, and Shavuot coming up this weekend, starting Sunday evening, the next pilgrimage holiday, the 49 days between those two holidays, as a time that we mark each night with a blessing and numbering the day. It reminds me a lot of the desire to use counting as a way to control the uncontrollable around end of life, thinking about the unanswerable questions that we all pose or receive to healthcare professionals. How much time does she have left? How many days is it going to be? How many hours should I expect? It makes me think of the teaching in the book of Psalms: teach us to count our days that we may acquire a heart of wisdom, in Psalm 90. One way to see the role and the value of the doula in Jewish practice is as a witness to that counting, right? The doula shows up to provide accompaniment when we who may be at bedside as caregivers, as family members, may be doing things like counting the seconds between breaths, not knowing when it's going to be his last breath, but sitting with the sacred accompaniment of another human being breathing in that moment, to be there when life is dwindling and death comes into focus. The growth of and attention on end of life doulas in recent years reinforces this idea of being with the living in the dying moments, of being someone who can be counted on to help support the transition for the patient and for their family. So it's an honor to accompany you all here today as we learn together with our teacher, Zoe. So, a brief word of introduction to Zoe Goldblatt. Zoe has been a partner of ours at Shomer Collective in this sacred work over the last years. She is an end of life doula, an activity therapist, an intimacy coach, and one of the founders of the Ari Yael Jewish Healing Center in the Bay Area. And Zoe, I want to thank you and offer you the chance to offer a few words of introduction to you and your work.
Oh, thank you so much, Rabbi Melanie. This is so wonderful to be here with everybody. Thank you, Samantha. It's been such a pleasure to partner with Shomer Collective and meet with other Jewish doulas from across the continent on a quarterly basis. That Shomer Collective provides that space for meetups for Jewish doulas is really valuable and special. And I'm just so happy to be here today. I love what you said, your teaching that you just shared, Melanie, about the counting and the Omer and the journey from Exodus, slavery to liberation, and Shavuot coming up this weekend. And it just reminds me, too, that, there's something beautiful about this saying that we have that all of us were there at Mount Sinai, no matter when we
Mm,
were born or when we die. It's like we're still all there, and there's something I find comforting about that,
mm,
because a lot of what my clients tell me when they're dying is they have FOMO. They don't want to miss out on what's going to happen. And I
mm,
can, remind them in a way like, well, we were all there at Sinai. So in a way, we don't go away. Where there's a timeless time to Jewish
mm.
time that brings a lot of comfort.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for adding that. I like to sign off in the days leading up to Shavuot by saying, I'll see you at Sinai, right? Reinforcing
Yes,
this idea that we'll
yes.
all be there in some way, in a metaphysical way, perhaps. So, to get us started, would love to hear, a little bit about your work as a doula. Maybe you could share with us what drew you to it and how you got trained, and what does it look like as someone who does this
Mm.
regularly now?
Yeah, thank you. Well, a lot of us start out as hospice volunteers. Often, when people say, well, I want to become a doula, where should I start? We usually say a great place to start is hospice. First of all, you get free training, and some hospices have really comprehensive trainings. So it's actually worthwhile if you have more than one local hospice to ask, tell me about your training. How many hours is it? Is it in person or on Zoom, etc.? Who are the trainers? Who are the facilitators? And so that's one way to get a nice basic training. And then you're also guaranteed kind of some hands on experience, right?
Mm,
Where you are guaranteed to be sitting with dying people and their loved ones and seeing how does that feel for you. What is that like? What does that bring up for you? And are there unattended sorrows in your own heart that are triggered by those experiences and need to be honored and processed before you become a doula? And just to be aware of them, and where are those tender spots in yourself?
mm,
And is this the right time for you to do this work? And then from there, after you've maybe tried that out and seen, like, yes, this is a good fit, it feels good. In a way, it inspires me, energizes me, maybe makes me appreciate life even more. Then you can start looking into some trainings. And I do recommend going to a training with the certification program, because there, not only will you have a peer group and a cohort that you can rely on and work with in the future, but you'll have teachers, mentors, supervisors that you can lean on, turn to, ask questions of, and continue to learn from over time, even when the program's done. So my initial training was with Kaiser Hospice in Portland, Oregon. They had a wonderful training and a wonderful supervisory program, and they even had ongoing education on a monthly basis. So I got a lot out of that. And then I went to an Enelda 4-day intensive in person in San Jose, California. That was back in 2017. And that's where I met a peer group and a cohort who lived in my area. And we immediately went on to form a doula network that is still going strong today. So, and we have together done a lot of continuing education, taken different courses together or separately, and we meet weekly and monthly to go over what we've learned, challenges, highs and lows.
I know that a lot of folks talk about the ANELDA training as one of the most recommended ones because it offers the opportunity to do work in person if one wants it. And I believe there's also ANELDA training available online. I did an asynchronous certification program through the University of Vermont. Has an end-of-life doula program, which is a different way of training when we weren't required to do any work with people in order to achieve the certificate. So for folks who haven't yet spent time with the dying, I think your recommendation to start with your local volunteer opportunities is a fabulous way in. It reminds me that here in New York, Mount Sinai Hospital in the palliative care department, they have end-of-life doula training program for volunteers. And if any of you are looking for something locally and you're not able to find it, feel free to reach out to us. We do a lot of information and referral. Happy to help you find people close to you to talk to get started. So in your work, Zoe, what makes your work Jewish?
I love that question. Well, first of all, I identify so strongly as Jewish, and I bring that to everything that I do, whether I mention that or not. For example, this morning I led a discussion group for people who all have terminal illnesses and talking to them about their process and what they're going through. And I shared a poem by Zelda, which was translated from Hebrew. She's sort of a classic Israeli poet who wrote sort of metaphysical and symbolic poetry that dealt a lot with grief and
Mm,
loss. And so I read a poem by her, even though only one out of those four people was Jewish. I was able to bring this beautiful poem that dealt with grief and loss because I read the original in Hebrew and I love her poetry. So that's
yeah.
just one small example of how even if the group that I'm dealing with is not all Jewish, I'm bringing my Jewish sensibilities, background, and cultural knowledge and wisdom.
It reminds me, we have a lot of folks who turn to us looking for a doula, and they may live in a place where we haven't yet connected with doulas who identify as Jewish or are providing Jewish ritual support in their work. That it's still possible to connect with a doula who may have an awareness of helping the client, the patient, the family to tap into their own spiritual resources, even if it's not something that's shared between the doula and the patient family.
That's true. I mean, I think maybe earlier you were quoting from one of the Psalms, and the
Yeah.
Psalms is certainly something that's shared by a wide range of people. They're
Yeah.
familiar with the Psalms, even if they're not from
Yes.
a Jewish background.
Yes. That psalm I talk about, Psalm 90, teach us to count our days, is one that I used frequently in my work training to be a chaplain, working
Mhm.
with Christian patients and families who were very devout in their own faith, but they knew that wasn't a faith we shared. But the idea of a Judeo-Christian scripture was something that we could relate to, that I was familiar with, that they were familiar with, that had meaning together in those moments. I bring up this idea of chaplaincy because we get this question a lot. What is the difference between a doula and a chaplain? So I'm curious for you who has trained as a doula, how you see the difference.
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, I often get asked by hospice chaplains, like, "Well, wait a minute, are you taking my job?" What where there's so much, there seems to be so much overlap, and I always reassure the hospice chaplains that they are so needed and so valuable. And no, I'm not trying to take away their job. I actually love working with chaplains and clergy members. I want to say that not all doulas have a spiritual care background. I mean, I
Yes.
happen to have that, and I share a lot of skills with chaplains. But Many doulas come from different backgrounds. So some doulas are from a medical background. There's certainly a large percentage of doulas who are retired medical professionals who maybe were sort of a little bit frustrated that they didn't get to spend the time with their patients that they can as doulas. And
Mm,
so when people ask me, well, what is the difference or what's, unique about a doula versus a chaplain is, a doula is kind of your personal advocate, your personal support person who can spend a lot more time with you and
mm,
therefore get to know you on a much more personal level and can provide very personalized services to you in a time frame and with more flexibility on time
mhm,
than a working chaplain or even social worker can do. I mean, the hospice chaplains are just, they have a large roster of patients, maybe up to 50 patients that they need to see in a week. And so a doula can spend, 2, 3 hours at a time with somebody. And that's a luxury and it is a paid service.
yeah, I appreciate that distinction. I am a board certified chaplain. Also, I like
Mhm.
to say I collect degrees as my hobby. But having worked in a hospital setting as a chaplain intern, what you say is exactly how the chaplains function from one room to the next, from one list to the next of people who have requested a chaplain visit. In an inpatient hospital setting. And in a hospice setting, many of you may already be familiar with this, but the chaplain role is part of the hospice team in the Medicare benefit, right? When you have a hospice team taking care of you, the doctor needs to see you at least once every X number of days, a nurse every Y number of days, a social worker every Z number of days, and the chaplain also has to do an assessment initially and then is part of the team who's required to make a visit at a regular basis, but has other people that they need to be visiting. It makes me concerned a little bit, though, that the way, with the broken healthcare system in this country, at least, um, people are accessing doulas as fee for service
Yeah.
is something that's only available to a limited group of people. I wonder how you see that in your work.
I don't think that's necessarily true, and I'll address that in a
Good.
second. I just want to circle back one moment to a friend and colleague of mine who's a retired cantor and rabbi and is just recently employed as a hospital chaplain. And she
Hmm.
said that what's hard for her is that she's often called to the bedside when the person is already dying and they don't
Yes.
have a pre-existing relationship. So that's another thing that's really wonderful about a doula is that you have that pre-existing relationship before the
Mm,
person is actively dying. And so you know what will comfort them, what they've requested, what they
mhm.
want, and you can provide that for them.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you.
So in terms of, and I'm so glad you raised this about, well, is this only for people who can afford it, who, have the means and the money? No,
Yeah.
this should be for everybody. And what the way that we currently address that as professional doulas is we always provide, first of all, a sliding scale.
Mm,
And we ask about that. We ask about the income level and the capacity to pay us. And then we offer sliding scale. And we also, every doula I know takes on, a certain percentage of pro bono clients at any given
mhm,
time. So right now I have two clients who are paying at a very low level, and then I have one who's just not paying.
mhm,
And out of and I try not to have more than um, 4 or 5 clients at a time, also
mhm,
because that's another huge difference. That
mhm,
doulas don't have 20 or even 10 clients at a time. I
mm.
think once I had 10 at a time, and it felt like too much. And
Wow. Yeah.
I said I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah. I know you have a wealth of stories to share, and I'm eager to invite you to
Mhm.
to share some of the stories with us, but I have a few more practical questions before we
Please.
get to that. Um, we've spoken about chaplains and doulas and healthcare systems. How do you as a doula work with the rest of the healthcare team and in a Jewish system if someone also has a rabbi as a member of a synagogue that may have, visiting the sick committee? how are you connected to the other systems that may be supporting a person or a family?
That's a great question. Here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we're so fortunate. We have a really wonderful, active Jewish end-of-life professionals network that meets
Mm,
quarterly. And so the doulas in that group will often get referrals from clergy and from our local Jewish funeral home, and vice versa. We, as the doulas, will refer to the Jewish funeral home, to clergy members that we think are a good match. If the person wants to talk about funeral planning, if they want to talk about body disposition,
mhm,
meaning burial versus cremation, or other means of what to do with their body after they die. So I love working with Jewish professionals in all the fields, including psychiatrists,
yeah.
psychologists, who come from a Jewish background, and we'll have that cultural competency and that sort of initial right up front level of comfort. um, and maybe we're getting to that, but why is it important to have a Jewish doula, or why that's
Mm,
such a good thing for Jewish families? I want to get to
yeah.
that. But in terms of working with medical staff, we think as doulas that it's really important to get permission upfront from our clients that we can communicate with the hospice team or the palliative
Mm,
care team, and that team to communicate with us. And some
mm,
of us are even privileged to be able to attend team meetings with the
wow.
hospice team. That doesn't
Wow.
happen all the time, but we
Mhm,
strive for that. And we're always so grateful when that does get to happen. And, sometimes I'm on the phone with the hospice nurse and I'm saying, I was there this morning for the whole morning and I saw something, I saw a change, and I want to let you know about it. And also, the family talked to me about a worry that they have about this medication, but they're kind of shy or embarrassed to bring that up with you. And they said that I
mm,
could. So
mm,
sometimes I'm sort of a go between or a
yeah,
bridge between hospice and the family, or between the client and a member of their medical team.
that's helpful.
Mhm.
Um, there's a question in the chat. Is there a supervision system? Do you have supervision as a doula?
So, what I've sort of put into place for myself is a peer group that we
Hmm.
hold each other accountable. We have case review once a month, with my particular network that I co founded, where we talk about our cases and we talk about, like I said before, the challenges and the triumphs. There's also a national group for medical aid in dying, where two doulas who are, sort of nationally recognized doulas around this topic, they have offered to meet with any doulas who are encountering this in their work. And again, like, we talk about our cases with each other, and we are very connected, and as doulas across the country and regionally, and we care about each other's and our own reputations and ethical behavior. And I saw someone put in the chat that Anelda
Yeah,
also offers case consultation. I do recommend going through certification, because that's another
yeah.
way to get supervision.
Yeah, being part of a network. It reminds me of the mental health care system, whereby once you've graduated from supervision and you're licensed, you can still avail yourself of supervision, often in a peer supervision group. Licensed social workers. I'm thinking about. Earlier in the conversation, another question from the chat: certification was mentioned. Just having been ELDA trained, I inquired about certification and heard there's no governing body. What certification is available?
So each training program provides their own individual in-house certification, and that's the
Yeah.
best we have right now. Um, there's an organization nationally called NEDA, NEDA, the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance. And I'm a member there. I always encourage
Mhm.
membership in these national organizations, because I think that eventually we are moving towards some national certification, although I think there's pros and cons to that, because honestly, doulas are a grassroots movement. similar to how hospice was when it started out, in maybe the 1970s. So doulas are now sort of really filling in some of the gaps that hospice used to provide. So
Hmm.
hospice originally was always not for profit. It was, people who were very passionate about the work and could spend, hours with the patients and the clients. And now it's not so much like that everywhere. It's become more of a corporate entity, and it's become a little bit more that hospice staff have less time to spend with each patient. I think that's a reality that I can speak to. I know not every hospice is like that, um, but doulas are much more flexible. We can show up in the middle of the night. We can show up on holidays and weekends. We can be contacted on our personal cell phones. We have good boundaries, but we also can do a lot of things that licensed professionals cannot do.
Hmm. You talked about getting calls in the middle of the night. Some of the questions that people sent us in advance included things like, how do you as a doula take care of yourself before, during, and after the experience of being with a dying patient?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have boundaries because otherwise you'll just burn out immediately. So, every doula is different because we each have different capacities, right? Physically and emotionally. So you need to find out what are your boundaries and capacities, and then don't promise or offer more than you can actually give to any
Hmm.
one client. And different clients, will have different needs and also trigger different things within you. They may push your
Hmm.
buttons sometimes, and you may have to set stronger boundaries and say, actually, I'm not open to texting after this hour,
Hmm.
or I will be charging in 15-minute increments for texts
Hmm.
and calls and emails.
Yeah.
Um, so those are some of the things that I do to set boundaries, and then I make sure to spend a lot of time in nature. So, like
Mm.
I said, I don't take on that many clients at once, and I have a lot of downtime. So this isn't a money making career. In fact, I don't think I know any doulas who do this full time and make a full time living. I mean, I do this work full time, but I'm not
Yes.
working 40 hours a week
Mm.
with with my clients in person at all. Um, and so this is really work that is a labor of love. It's not
Mhm.
high paying, and so we're
Mhm.
not in it for the money. And therefore we don't have to push ourselves beyond our capacities. Other things that I do, self care rituals, is for myself, I have a personal mikvah practice. So, as a Jewish person, I love mikvah, and I love doing mikvah rituals also for my clients and their
Mhm.
family members, but I always do it for myself. When I come home from a death, I do a personal mikvah, and I do different water rituals on a daily basis.
Mhm. Beautiful. So we'd love to hear some of the stories that you might have to share, and in particular to answer the question that you raised about why is it important to choose a Jewish doula?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I wanted to say, especially in our current cultural climate, and I don't know if this has been named before, but I feel like when I show up to a household where either the dying person is Jewish, or maybe their spouse is Jewish and they're not, or maybe they have a Jewish child, um, or somebody else who's very close, I feel that when I show up as a Jewish doula and identify myself that way, that there's a collective exhale in the
Mm.
home. And what is that exhale about? There's sort of like it's like on some level, Zoe is going to get me. She's going to get us. She's going to, in terms of, she gets it. She understands. And I don't know what that means to them. That could mean different things to different people. But I think that universally, at least, at the very least, common denominator, it would mean that I'm not going to be ignorant of Jewish cultural references and markers and indicators. I'm also
Mhm.
not going to be discriminatory or prejudiced. I'm not bringing that with me, you
Mm.
know, unconscious bias. I mean,
Mm.
maybe I am, but I less than maybe other folks.
Mhm.
And I don't feel like I am because I feel like I've really examined that in myself.
Mm.
Um, do I have, and I think we all should, do we have internalized anti Semitism? That's an important question to ask because a lot of people do, even when they identify as Jewish. And so when I show up as a person who loves Judaism and loves being Jewish, I'm also giving permission to the people in the home that I'm visiting as a doula to also connect. Can they find that within themselves? Can they find that love? Can they find that joy? Can they find that self acceptance? And can they feel my acceptance radiating towards them?
Mm. Beautiful.
And really, if I had to put
Beautiful.
it in a nutshell, I think
Yeah.
that's the value of a Jewish doula, if nothing
Mm.
else. Even
Yes.
if, go, yes.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna ask you to tell a story maybe of a client family you worked with that stays with you for a particular reason. What stands out in your work that you want to share with this audience today?
Yeah, sure. And I'll acknowledge that I may have told some of these stories before at other Shomer events because,
Sure.
they're powerful stories and they're my stories. And we all have beautiful stories to share. But, just on that topic, I'm recalling one client who, he said, "Look, I was raised Jewish in terms of my parents forced me to go to Hebrew school, and they kind of forced me to learn these prayers and have a bar mitzvah. But since then, I haven't really connected with it. So as an
Mm.
adult, I don't have much of a connection." And I said, "Fine, thank you for telling me that, and I'm not going to foist anything on you, and we don't even have to go there." But if you're curious about any of those prayers, what they might mean to you now or look like now, I'm happy to look at them with you and see what's there for you, if
Mm.
anything. And he's,
Mm.
he's still like, well, maybe, maybe. And so we did a bunch of other things. But as he drew closer to his death, it happened to be the period leading up to Rosh Hashanah.
Mm.
And so I came one day and he was, very quiet, not feeling well, just, you know, sort of coming in and out of sleep. And I said, it's almost Rosh Hashanah. And he said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yeah. And I've been practicing these songs that I'm going to be singing at my synagogue. Would you like to hear a couple of them?" And he said, "Sure, sure." And I started singing some of the songs and for the holiday practice, and I just singing them softly and and they have this sort of quality of longing and this quality of connecting with yearning and wanting to be close to God. And he recognized the melodies and he recognized the words, and he tears came to him. He
Mm.
said, I know that, I know that. And I said, do you want to know what it means? He said, oh yeah. It's pitchu li sharei tzedek, open the gates for me. I want to connect. I want to feel that love. I want to feel that source.
Mm.
And he got very emotional and he said, I never thought of that before. I never thought what that could mean.
Mm.
And I wasn't there the day he died, but the people who were there told me that his last words were open the gates, open the
Mm.
gates.
Mm. Beautiful. Yeah, Rosh Hashanah, the gates are open, and Yom Kippur, we have the dress rehearsal for our death, and there you were, setting him up. I think the story also illustrates a reconciliation of sorts, right? People
Mm.
um, sometimes get stuck with the things that they've left unresolved once their death comes into view. And you, as a doula, are accompanying them through the resolution, or at least attention to those
Mhm.
places where they may have been stuck or disconnected to help reconnect him, in this case, to the tradition that he had been separated from for so many years. Mm.
There was something there for him at the end.
Yeah,
And I didn't force it on him. I never tried, I don't I have no interest in doing that. Um,
yeah,
but I love to offer it and just see
yeah.
what happens. I'll give another example that's different. This was a man who considered himself to be pretty much atheist, but had a very strong Jewish cultural connection. And so he had dementia, and I brought him, he loved sports, and he had grown up near Coney Island in New York City. And I brought a book that was, it was an interesting book about the history of baseball, but it was written from a Jewish perspective. It's a
Mm,
really cool book, and it was written for young people. But it was very well written. It was definitely a work of literature, but it was simple. And it told stories of boys who were Jewish, who were either baseball players or who loved baseball.
mm,
And as I was reading this aloud to him when I visited him, he connected with a really painful story in his childhood where he was bullied by some non Jewish kids. And I guess he had been taught at home not to fight back,
mm,
because that, wasn't, his family taught him that it wasn't ethical to, to fight, and that he shouldn't fight back. And so he didn't. And these boys would goad him and beat him up and call him a coward. And one day one of them said, "I really like you. I think you're such a good boy, a kid, but I just don't get why you're such a coward." And 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 it was connected to being Jewish somehow
mm,
for him, that Jews were cowards. And and he lived, this was such a wound for him his whole life. And so when the state of Israel was formed and he got to see Jewish soldiers defending Israel, it just struck such a chord in him. And
mm,
every time he talked about it, it would bring tears to his eyes. And he would say, to think of the Jewish people as fighters just, gives me such pride and such, healing. And there was something about these stories, that allowed him to share this and talk about it and then connect with his love of Israel in that way. And that was
mm,
his path. And
mhm.
it brought him healing to talk about that with me as his doula, as somebody who is non-judgmental, who, he could bring up this shame, and then talk about how it resolved, just by reading those stories.
Beautiful, beautiful. We have a question in the chat. Ideally, when in the process would you want to be contacted or engaged by the patient or the family?
um, we as doulas believe that the earlier the better.
Of course.
Don't wait until the person's dying, that's, that, or they're ready to die. um, Contact us either when someone has received a serious diagnosis. Doesn't even have to be a terminal diagnosis, but a life threatening or serious illness
Mhm,
diagnosis is the best time to
mhm,
contact a doula, or when you've reached a certain age. And I will say that the average age of mortality in the United States right now is 79 years old,
mhm,
which is a lot lower than some other countries, and higher than others, but 79 years old. So if someone's around that age, it's a good time to contact a doula, even if you have no illness, because 79 is the average age of death in the US.
mhm,
So if you contact a doula early on, that means that you're still feeling relatively well. There's no crisis, there's no urgency, and you have time to do the
Mm,
work,
mhm,
all the important and sacred work that can be done.
mm. I imagine a time that may make sense for some people is when there's been a change in response to treatment, right? When the treatment is no longer curative, right? And we're electing hospice care, comfort care, if that might be the right time. Or
Yeah.
perhaps might even be a little later than a doula would desire.
You
Um,
can call a doula at any
yeah,
point. You can
yeah,
call a
great,
doula even during active dying or when the person has said, I'm
mhm,
choosing medical aid in dying and I want to do it as soon as possible.
great. Um, I have a question that was sent to me directly that I'll ask you to talk a little bit about after death, and then we have a bunch more practical considerations. How do you approach Shiva or grief in working with the mourners or the people surrounding the identified patient?
Mhm. I always recommend that grief work be done. I always recommend that they do Shiva practice and try to educate them about it, send them to Shomer Collective, send them to
Mm,
Jade, send them to other organizations that
mhm,
do education and support around Shiva, around funerals and memorials, etc. Um, and I personally offer grief sessions. I stay with the loved ones after the death. Like literally after the death, but also I do follow ups. And I think all doulas do that. Almost all doulas
mhm.
offer that.
Mhm. It reminds me in the ideal hospice model, bereavement
Mhm.
care is part of the model for 11 months or a
For
year
sure.
following the death of a hospice patient.
I recommend that they use any and all grief support that's offered.
Great. How do people find you?
I and my colleagues, all of us doulas, are listed in various directories.
Uh-huh.
So there are nationwide directories through INELDA, NEDA, NEDA, and Shomer Collective for Jewish doulas. And there
Hmm.
are also other. There's a Bay Area directory that's being formed as we speak,
Great.
and so that's how people find me. And other doulas. And we as doulas are also found through referrals with
Hmm.
all those professionals that we work with that we spoke of
Great.
earlier, the therapists, the social workers, the hospice nurses, and chaplains do refer to us.
The Shomer Collective Doula
Yeah.
directory on our website. And I'll say it's only as good as the people who are willing to list themselves. So if you're here
Yeah.
and you aren't listed and you should be listed, please add yourself. And if you need help finding someone in an area where we don't have a doula listed, reach out to us and we'll help you. There's a question related to that. Can this work be done virtually if I don't have access to a doula in my area, or if I'm more
Mhm.
comfortable with someone who may not be able to come nearby?
Yes, I've worked with people over the phone, over Zoom. And when I say I just need to emphasize that I mean all doulas.
Yes.
Yes, we do. And every doula is different. And I know that many of us do remote work and virtual work when needed or when
Mhm.
requested.
Great. I know someone who has a life-limiting diagnosis who's working remotely with 2 doulas
Yeah.
because he couldn't find a good match in his own area and wanted
Right.
someone who had a different set of competencies. So the work happens. There've been a couple of questions about training that I'll address. One is the Shomer Collective considering creating a program for trained doulas that would focus on doing this work with a Jewish lens. Zoe and her partner Dan and Samantha at Shomer Collective and I have been part of a conversation for a good while now about the need for a Jewish content training for people who already have training as end-of-life doulas. So the answer is yes. It's very much a live conversation. We've written up some plans. We're looking for some funding partners. And if this is of interest to you in helping to support us, you out there, our listening audience, please be in touch with us, hello@shomercollective.org directly, and we can talk more about training. And I'll say that the programs available through the Ariya El Healing Center, through Shomer Collective, more generally can help to fill the tool toolbox of someone aspiring to have Jewish competency as an end-of-life doula. For example, the last program in our Let's Talk series was about the cost of dying Jewishly. It's helpful for a doula to understand what the different pieces are in supporting a family who's putting together a plan where they want to access Jewish burial, Jewish funeral, how to access that, what the costs are. So those are educational programs that a doula can avail themselves of that aren't directed only toward doulas, but will help fill your toolbox. Mark asks a question to be part of Shomer's directory. Do I need to be Jewish, or is there a need to have some Jewish training? What makes our directory different is that we're asking doulas who are working with Jewish families, have a Jewish competency, to list themselves. So it's a little bit more focused than the people who may be available on the NIDA or ANELDA directories, who may have a multi-faith spiritual competency, can work with anyone from any spiritual background, as many chaplains are trained in multi-faith approaches. But the Shomer directory is looking for people who identify as Jewish, who can meet the needs of Jewish clients. As Zoe said, walking in as a Jew, serving someone for whom a Jewish connection is important around end of life. And Zoe is also facilitating for Shomer Collective a quarterly meetup for Jewish doulas, as she said, where the members of that meetup, volunteers, are providing professional development for one another on Jewish topics. Zoe does a good deal of the teaching about using blessings, about using ritual at bedside, for example. So that's to answer those questions. There was one question sent to us in advance about asking about Jewish views on death with dignity, and self-delivery help were the words that the person put in the question to us. So from a Jewish perspective, and Shomer's work is all about making Jewish wisdom accessible, right? So that you can understand what Jewish tradition has to offer, and then make a decision that's in line with your own values and practices. Death with dignity is another term for what we call medical aid in dying in the field. So here in the United States, medical aid in dying is legal in a certain number of states. It's a state-by-state decision. For example, it's currently up for a decision, as it has been every year for several, in New York. It's already legal in California, where Zoe is working and practicing. It's legal in New Jersey, another state with a large Jewish population. It's legal in Vermont, where Vermont has removed its residency requirement. Other states, there's a residency requirement. So Jewish tradition considers the extension of life to be something that's important. When we have the ability to use medicine to continue to be alive, to be in relationship with one another, with God, with humanity, that's an important thing. And we recognize the challenges around extending life when the quality of life is no longer in a place where it outweighs the suffering. If the extension of life is going to increase the suffering, there are rabbinic considerations in terms of Jewish law to help us to see that extending someone's suffering isn't a desirable thing. It reminds me of a story in the Talmud of a famous rabbi who is on his deathbed. He's suffering, and his students are surrounding him, praying for him to get better day and night. And his handmaiden, it says in the story, I think of it as an aide, is attending to him and seeing him struggling with having to go to the bathroom constantly. And he's taking his tefillin, which he wears for his prayers, off and having to put them back on. And she's seeing his suffering. And his students are praying for his recovery. And she wants him to stop suffering. And she goes to the roof of the house that he's in, and she takes a jug and she throws it to the ground. And the sound in that moment startles the students such that their prayers are paused just for a moment. And the story tells us that it allows the rabbi's soul to depart to the heavens. It allows him to die. The students want him to stay alive. The person closest to him, attending to his physical needs, sees that his suffering is only increasing. And in that moment, the cessation of prayers for him to continue to live allowed him to die. So Judaism grapples with this tension between staying alive and suffering. And you will find liberal rabbinic opinions now approving medical aid in dying. We see one from the conservative movement, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who attended to this question when it became legal in California, grappling with these questions. And the reform movement has also put out a Jewish legal opinion in Canada where medical aid in dying is accessible to more people because it's part of the national socialized medical system, and medical aid in dying in Canada is physician administered. In the United States, it's self administered. So I just wanted to attend to that question. And I know, Zoe, you've dealt with a number of families who have availed themselves of medical aid in dying in California. What does it look like for you in your practice as a doula and Jewishly?
Well, I know we're almost out of time. I have attended 7 deaths to date that of people who chose medical aid in dying. They were all peaceful deaths. They were all deaths that that person chose and went through a long process to qualify and to talk to all of their loved ones about it. Their loved ones were present. They had the death they wanted. I was there as a support. Um, and I was at one death of somebody who was not Jewish, but had a playlist that she wanted played as she was dying. And I saw on that list the Jewish song Lech Lach, the Debbie Friedman song. And I said, "Oh, I know that song." And the playlist failed while she was dying. And so I sang that song to her as she was dying. And her husband and her best friend said there could have been no better experience for her as she was dying, since that was one of her favorite songs.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you. One more quick question. A noticing of a gender disparity amongst the population of current and aspiring doulas. Is that the reality that also shows up in the preferences that patients or clients may have when picking a doula?
Fortunately, we do know male doulas, and we're hoping for more male doulas. We're hoping for more doulas of color. We are not surprised, however, that right now most of the doulas tend to be women, tend to be older women, not all, tend to be white women. And this is partly because of the fact that it's a lower paying job, it's an emotional labor job, it's a job that is new, it's a new field. And so
Mhm.
we are encouraging and really trying to reach out to more people so that we can have more of a diversity in our doula field.
Thank you, Zoe. I know we could probably stay on for another hour attending to questions, but I'll invite people to continue to be in touch with us at Shomer Collective to connect in all the ways we've already outlined with us, with Zoe's work in the Bay Area as relevant. And again, if you need more support, reach out to us at hello@shomercollective.org. And our work is only possible because of the generosity of our donors. So if you feel so moved to help support our work, to be able to continue to do this, give generously what you can. And I thank you all. I thank you, especially Zoe, for being here with us today. So good to see you. Wishing you all a revelatory time at Sinai. We'll see you there on Shavuot.
Thank you, Rabbi Melanie.
Take good care, everyone. Many blessings.